you're 40 years old. Maybe 42, maybe 45. And somewhere, quietly, without any alarm going off, you've become the richest version of yourself you've ever been. And somehow, you feel poorer than you did at 28. That's not a coincidence. That's not bad luck. That's a trap. And it's been closing around you for years without a single sound. Here's what nobody tells you. The year your income peaks is often the exact same year your wealth quietly stops growing. Not because you failed, because you succeeded, and success, without asking permission, taught you how to spend. Stay with me for the next hour. I'm going to walk you through 5 things about turning 40 that nobody warns you about. Not the obvious stuff, the invisible stuff, the stuff hiding in your bank statement right now, disguised as a normal life. Let's start with the one that's bleeding you dry without you ever noticing it happen. Quietly, month after month, raise after raise. Let me tell you about a man I think about often. Not because I met him in some seminar, but because I've seen him 100 times, wearing 100 different faces. At 25, he was making $45,000 a year, splitting an apartment with a roommate, driving a car that rattled at highway speed, and somehow, impossibly, he was saving money. Not much. A few $100s a month. But it was real, and it was growing. Now he's 43. He makes $140,000 a year, 3 times what he made back then. And he's saving less, in actual dollars, not percentages, than he did when he was broke in 25. Sit with that for a second, because it doesn't add up on paper. And yet, it's the quiet reality for millions of people like him. Maybe like you. This is the part nobody puts in the brochure about success. We're taught that more income solves money problems, that the answer to "I don't have enough" is simply earn more. For a while, that's even true, but somewhere along the way, so gradually you'd need a slow-motion camera to catch it, the math flips upside down. I call it the invisible math, because it never shows up as a single decision. Nobody wakes up one morning and says, "Today, I will spend all of my future wealth on convenience." It's never that dramatic. It's the second car, because now there are 2 commutes. It's the bigger house, because the family grew. And honestly, don't you deserve more space after all these years of grinding? It's the private school, the country club, the nicer vacations, the streaming subscriptions stacked on streaming subscriptions, the restaurant dinners that used to be a treat and are now just Tuesday. Each of those decisions, on its own, is reasonable. That's what makes this trap so effective. There is no single villain, no single purchase you can point to and say, "That's what ruined it." It's not ruin. It's erosion. And erosion, by definition, is invisible while it's happening. You only see it later, at the edge of a cliff that used to be solid ground. Here's the number that should keep you up at night, in a useful way. If your income triples between your late 20s and your early 40s, which for a disciplined, hardworking American professional is not unusual at all, but your lifestyle also triples, you have gained nothing. Worse than nothing, actually, because you've also gained the psychological weight of maintaining that lifestyle. You've built a bigger house of cards, and now the wind matters more. I want you to really picture the version of yourself at 25. Frugal, maybe out of necessity rather than virtue. Watching every dollar because there weren't many dollars to watch, And I want you to picture the version of yourself now, capable, respected, further along in your career than you ever imagined back then. And I want you to ask honestly, without defending yourself, if I saved a higher percentage of a smaller income back then, why am I saving a lower percentage of a bigger one now? The answer is almost never laziness. It's almost never stupidity. It's something quieter and more human than that. It's the fact that comfort has a gravitational pull. Once you experience a certain standard of living, going backward feels like loss. Even if going backward would mean freedom, would mean security, would mean the difference between retiring on your terms or working until your body forces you to stop. This is what I mean by the silent lifestyle trap. It's not that you're bad with money. It's that money got quieter as it got bigger. When you were young, every dollar mattered, so every dollar got attention. Now, dollars move in the background, absorbed by a mortgage, a car payment, tuition, insurance, all the machinery of an adult life that looks, from the outside, like success. And maybe it is success. I'm not here to tell you your life is wrong. I'm here to tell you something more specific. The years between 40 and 50 are the years your money either compounds into real freedom or quietly funds a lifestyle that has no ceiling and no finish line. There is no dollar amount of income that fixes this on its own. I have talked to people earning $400,000 a year who feel just as trapped as people earning $80,000, because the trap was never about the size of the income. It was always about the gap between what comes in and what stays. So here's the first real shift I want to offer you, not as a lecture, but as an honest observation from someone who has watched this pattern play out again and again. The goal isn't to earn more. You've probably already proven you can do that. The goal is to notice, really notice, on paper, in numbers, without flinching, exactly how much of every raise, every bonus, every promotion actually survives contact with your lifestyle. Because that surviving amount, that stubborn little percentage that makes it past your spending and into something that grows, is the only number that actually determines your future. Everything else is just decoration. A nicer decoration, maybe. A more comfortable decoration. But decoration all the same. And decoration doesn't compound. Only the money you actually keep does that. And that's the part we'll go deeper into next. Because knowing the trap exists is only the beginning. The real question is what's waiting for you on the other side of it, quietly ticking away. There's a number most people at 40 have never actually looked at. And I want you to look at it with me now, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. At 20, you had roughly 45 working years ahead before a typical retirement age. At 40, you have roughly 25. That's almost half your working life gone, and most people, if they're honest, haven't even started investing seriously yet. Not because they're irresponsible, because life got in the way. The wedding, the mortgage, the kids, the promotions demanding 60-hour weeks, the years that simply disappeared into the business of living. Here's the part that should sit heavy for a moment, not as punishment, but as clarity. Money doesn't care about your excuses. Time doesn't negotiate. And the single most powerful force in building wealth, compound growth, is measured not in dollars, but in years. It rewards people who start early with a generosity that looks almost unfair, and punishes people who start late with a quietness that feels, at first, like nothing happened at all. Let me show you what I mean, because the numbers are more brutal than most people expect. Imagine 3 people, all putting away $500 a month into an investment account earning a reasonable long-term average return. One starts at 30, one at 40, one at 50. All three retire at 65. The person who started at 30, 35 years of consistent investing, ends up with somewhere close to $900,000. The one who started at 40, 25 years, ends up with roughly $400,000. The one who started at 50, only 15 years, ends up with around $150,000. Read those numbers again slowly. The person who started 10 years later doesn't end up with a little less. They end up with less than half. The one who started 20 years later ends up with barely a sixth of what the earliest starter has. None of these three worked harder, or were smarter, or luckier. The only variable that changed was time. This is why I call it the 20-year countdown. Not to scare you into paralysis. Fear that freezes you is useless, but to give you an honest picture of where you stand on the clock. If you're 40, you're not at the starting line. You're somewhere in the middle of the race, whether you've been training or not. And the good news is, the middle of the race is still a race you can win. 25 years is still an enormous amount of time for money to grow, but it's not infinite. And every year you wait is a year that never comes back. I think about this the way I think about planting a tree. The best time was 20 years ago. The second best time is today. Not next year when the bonus comes in. Not after the kids finish college. Not once the market feels safer. Today, with whatever amount you can actually commit to, consistently, without drama. Because here's the quiet truth nobody puts on a billboard. It's not the size of your first contribution that determines your future. It's the number of years that contribution is allowed to sit, undisturbed, compounding on itself. Looking like nothing is happening for a long time. And then, in the final decade, looking like everything is happening at once. That's the strange nature of compound growth. Boring for years. Silent for years. And then, if protected long enough, it becomes the difference between working until your body forces you to stop and choosing, on your own terms, when to walk away. So the question isn't whether you're behind. Some of you are, and pretending otherwise doesn't help you. The question is what you do with the 25 years you almost certainly still have. What it is not enough time for is more waiting. Here's one more layer, because math alone doesn't explain why capable people fall into this pattern. It's not that they don't understand compound interest. Most could explain the concept back to you. The problem is that time doesn't feel urgent when it's invisible. If someone told you that every day you waited cost you exactly $11, guaranteed, taken from your future, you'd feel it, the way you feel a slow leak in a tire. But that's not how it works. The cost of waiting shows up 30 years later as an absence, a number that could have existed, but doesn't. And absence is hard to feel with the urgency of a real, present loss. This is why so many people in their 40s describe a quiet, specific kind of regret. Not, I made a bad decision, but I made no decision for a long time and didn't notice the cost. There's no mistake to point to and learn from. Just years. I don't say this to make you feel behind. You deserve the real math, not the comfortable version. The comfortable version says it's never too late and stops there. The real version says it's not too late, but it is later than it was. And the years between now and retirement matter more than the last ones did, simply because fewer remain. So stop measuring your financial life against someone who started at 30. That comparison only produces shame, and shame doesn't build wealth. Measure it by the 25 years you still have, starting today. That number isn't a countdown to dread. It's the last asset you own that still multiplies quietly, whether you're watching it or not. The clock has been running since the day you were born. It doesn't pause for busy seasons or for waiting until things feel stable. It simply runs. The only choice is whether you put it to work for you, starting now, or let it keep running without you. Nobody sends you a warning letter before this one arrives. There's no meeting, no memo, no moment where someone sits you down and says, "By the way, starting around your early 40s, money is going to start pulling on you from two directions at once, and it's going to feel like nothing you've experienced before." It just starts happening, quietly, in the background of an ordinary year. On one side, there's a phone call. Maybe it's about your father's knee, or your mother's memory, or a diagnosis that changes everything overnight. Suddenly, the parents who used to take care of you need you to take care of them. Not someday, in some abstract future, but now, this year, possibly this month. Medical bills, home modifications, a caregiver, or the quiet realization that you might have to become the caregiver yourself. Nobody plans for exactly when this starts, because it doesn't arrive on a schedule. It arrives on its own timeline, indifferent to whether you're ready. On the other side, there's a very different kind of bill. College tuition, tutoring, braces, cars for teenagers who are suddenly old enough to need them. The cost of raising kids doesn't peak when they're small and adorable. It peaks right around the time they're becoming adults, right when the price tags get serious, right when a single semester can cost more than your first car. And here's the part that makes this so brutal, so specifically brutal for people in their 40s and 50s. These two pressures tend to arrive at almost exactly the same time. It's not a coincidence, even though it feels like one. If you had children in your late 20s or early 30s, they're becoming teenagers and young adults right around the time your own parents are entering the years where their health starts to become unpredictable. The math of human biology lines up in a way that nobody designed, but everybody eventually feels. I call this the sandwich squeeze, and if you're in it, you already know it's not a metaphor. It's your actual bank account, actually being pulled in two directions by two people you love at the exact same time. And here's what almost nobody says out loud about it. You cannot always help both sides fully, not without sacrificing something else. Your own retirement, your own health, your own marriage, your own sense of who you are outside of being needed by everyone at once. This is where guilt becomes one of the most expensive emotions a person in their 40s will ever feel. Because when your mother needs help and you can't give unlimited help, guilt whispers that you're failing her. When your kid needs tuition money and you can't cover all of it, guilt whispers that you're failing them. And underneath both of those whispers is a quieter, more dangerous one. The idea that being a good parent, or a good son, or a good daughter means saying yes to every request, regardless of what it costs your own future. I want to say something here that isn't in the coach playbook, because it's not motivational, it's just true. You are allowed to have limits. Helping your parents does not require you to bankrupt your own retirement. Loving your children does not require you to fund every dollar of their education while ignoring your own financial survival. In fact, the single most loving thing you can do for both generations, the one that actually protects everyone, is to make sure you don't become a financial burden on your children later, because you gave away everything now. Think about it from your kids' side for a moment. What do they actually need more? A fully funded 4-year private university with no loans at all, or a parent who isn't financially dependent on them 30 years from now? Most people when they really sit with that question honestly, know the answer. And yet the pressure of the moment, the immediate ask, the visible need in front of you, almost always wins against the invisible need 30 years away. That's not weakness. That's just how humans are wired. We respond to what's loud and close, not to what's quiet and far. The families who navigate this squeeze without being crushed by it are not the families with the most money. They're the families who had the uncomfortable conversations early, with parents about long-term care, with kids about what college can realistically cost, with themselves about what they can actually afford to give without destroying their own foundation. Silence is what makes this squeeze dangerous. Once the numbers are on the table, out loud, the panic usually shrinks, even when the math is hard. Nobody warned you about this age. But now you know it's coming, or already here. And knowing it's not a personal failure. It's simply what happens in the middle of a life, when the people who raised you and the people you're raising both need you at once. There's one more thing worth saying, quietly, before we move on. This season doesn't last forever, even though it feels endless while you're inside it. Parents eventually pass, or their needs stabilize into something manageable. Kids eventually graduate, get jobs, stop needing tuition checks. The squeeze has an expiration date, even if nobody tells you what it is in advance. What matters is surviving it without sacrificing the foundation you'll need once it's over. Because there is a life on the other side of the sandwich, and it deserves to be protected too. There's a moment in every financially stable person's life that feels completely harmless. It's not a crisis. It's not a mistake. It's actually the opposite. It's a feeling of arrival. The mortgage is manageable. The job is secure, or at least secure enough. The bills get paid without drama. And somewhere in that calm, a quiet thought slips in, almost too soft to notice. I've got this handled. I want you to pay close attention to that sentence, because it's one of the most dangerous sentences in personal finance, precisely because it isn't wrong. You probably do have it handled, compared to where you started. The problem isn't the sentence itself. The problem is what tends to happen right after someone believes it completely. Here's the pattern I've watched play out again and again in people who are intelligent, disciplined, and genuinely good with money. The moment they start to feel stable, they stop paying close attention. Not out of arrogance, out of exhaustion mostly. You've spent 15 or 20 years being careful, being disciplined, tracking every dollar, and at some point, your mind simply wants to stop working that hard. Stability starts to feel like permission to relax the vigilance that built the stability in the first place. This is exactly the moment when expensive decisions start to look reasonable. The business opportunity a friend brings you, that you'd have questioned harder at 28, gets a why not at 43, because you feel you can absorb the risk now. The investment promising returns a little too good to be true gets a pass, because you've earned the right to take a swing, haven't you? The boat, the second property, the friend who needs a loan just this once. Each one slides in under the radar of a mind that has quietly stopped asking the hard questions it used to ask automatically. I call this the confidence trap, and it's almost never triggered by financial ignorance. It's triggered by financial comfort. The people most vulnerable to it are not beginners. Beginners are scared, and fear makes people cautious. The people most vulnerable are the ones who've done well enough, for long enough, to start believing that their past success is proof against future mistakes. But money doesn't work that way. Every dollar you have is still just as capable of disappearing at 50 as it was at 25. The only difference is that at 50, you have less time to earn it back. Let me ask you something honestly, because I've asked myself the same question. When was the last time you actually reviewed your investments in detail? Not glanced at an app, sat down and asked whether the fees still make sense, whether the risk still matches your timeline, whether the plan you built 5 years ago still fits the life you're living now. If the honest answer is it's been a while, you're not alone. You're simply caught in the same current that catches almost everyone once the fear of not having enough gets replaced by the comfort of having enough for now. This is the part where I want to be very direct with you, because vague encouragement won't help. The years right around 40 are not the years to stop learning about money. They're the years to learn more carefully than ever, because the stakes are higher and the margin for error is smaller. A financial mistake at 25 has decades to be corrected. A financial mistake at 45 has far fewer decades left to absorb it. And a financial mistake at 55 can be the difference between a comfortable retirement and one spent working long past the age you'd hope to stop. Confidence isn't the enemy here. Complacency is. Confidence, earned through real understanding, is exactly what you need to make good decisions under pressure. Complacency, which only looks like confidence from the outside, is what convinces smart people to stop checking their own work. The two feel almost identical from the inside, which is precisely why this trap catches people who would never describe themselves as reckless. So here's the honest question worth sitting with. Not as guilt, but as a checkpoint. Are you still paying attention the way you did when you had less to lose? Or has stability quietly convinced you that attention is no longer required? The money doesn't know the difference between confidence and complacency. It only responds to whether someone is actually watching. I've noticed something else that makes this trap harder to catch. It doesn't just show up in risky bets. It shows up in small, boring neglect. The account opened 15 years ago and never revisited. The insurance policy bought once and assumed to still fit. The will that still names people no longer in your life. The beneficiary forms nobody has checked since the kids were toddlers. None of this feels like danger in the moment, because nothing is happening. That's the problem. The confidence trap rarely announces itself with a dramatic loss. More often, it lets small inefficiencies pile up for a decade, until something forces you to look, and you realize how much drifted while you weren't watching. This is why I think the healthiest financial habit anyone in their 40s can build isn't a new investment strategy. It's a recurring appointment with your own numbers. Not born from fear, but from respect for what you've built. Once or twice a year, sit down and actually look. Not to panic, just to see clearly. Because the version of you that got here by paying close attention deserves a version of you now that keeps paying it, even after the fear that once forced that attention has quietly faded away. There's an asset most people never put on their balance sheet, and it happens to be the largest one they own. It's not the house. It's not the retirement account. It's the ability to earn. Your income, your career, your professional value in the marketplace. That's the engine behind every other number in your financial life. And around 40, without much warning, that engine starts to show cracks that most people never expected. Nobody wants to say this part out loud, because it feels unfair. And honestly, it is unfair. But the data is consistent. year after year, across industries. Layoffs hit people in their 40s and 50s disproportionately hard, and the time it takes to find a new job at the same level, at the same pay, tends to stretch out longer than it did at 30. Age discrimination is technically illegal and practically real, showing up not as an explicit rejection, but as a quiet preference for someone earlier in their career, someone who costs less, someone who hasn't yet asked for the salary you've spent 20 years earning. At the same time, burnout starts compounding in ways it didn't in your 20s and 30s. Back then, exhaustion was temporary. A hard project, a rough quarter, a stretch you could recover from with a good weekend. In your 40s, the exhaustion starts to feel structural, layered on top of years of accumulated stress, family responsibilities, and a body that recovers more slowly than it used to. And underneath both of these forces, there's a third one, quieter, but just as dangerous. Entire industries getting reshaped by technology faster than most people can retrain for. Here's the uncomfortable truth sitting underneath all of this. Most people in their 40s have built their entire financial life on a single, fragile foundation. One job, one employer, one industry, one paycheck. It's the equivalent of an investor putting 100% of their portfolio into a single stock and hoping it never has a bad year. Financial advisors would call that reckless in an investment account. And yet, almost everyone does exactly that with their income, the single most important financial asset they own. I'm not telling you this to frighten you. I'm telling you because the years around 40 are exactly the years to start treating your income the way a smart investor treats a portfolio, with diversification, with a plan for what happens if the primary source takes a hit. This doesn't mean quitting your job to chase some reckless side hustle. It means being honest about a question most people avoid. If my main income disappeared tomorrow, what would I actually do? If the honest answer is I have no idea, that's the gap worth closing, starting now, while you still have the stability to build a bridge before you ever need to cross it. Some people build that bridge through skills, staying sharp, making sure their expertise doesn't quietly become obsolete, while they assume the market still values what it valued 10 years ago. Some build it through relationships, keeping their professional network alive instead of letting it go dormant once a job feels secure. Some build it through a second, smaller stream of income, something modest that proves to them and their bank account that they aren't entirely dependent on one employer's decisions about their future. None of this is about panic. It's about respect for how the world actually works, instead of how we wish it worked. The career cliff isn't a guarantee for everyone, but it's common enough, painful enough for those it hits, that ignoring the possibility isn't caution, it's denial. And denial is expensive, because the first time you seriously think about a backup plan often becomes the same week you urgently need one. I think about it this way. A fire extinguisher in your kitchen isn't an admission that your house is about to burn down. It's just what a responsible person keeps on hand, hoping to never need it. Treat your income the same way. Build the second stream, sharpen the skill. Keep the network warm, not because disaster is certain, but because at this age, the cost of being unprepared has grown, and the years left to recover from a serious income disruption have gotten shorter. Your income built everything you have. It deserves the same protection you'd give any asset that valuable. There's one more layer worth naming, because it's what quietly does the most damage. It's not just the risk itself. It's the identity wrapped around the job that makes the risk so hard to face. For a lot of people in their 40s, a career isn't just a paycheck. It's 20 years of proving something. To a parent who doubted you, to a younger version of yourself who wasn't sure you'd make it. Losing that, even temporarily, threatens more than income. It threatens the story you've told yourself about who you are. This is exactly why capable people avoid even thinking about a backup plan. Building one means admitting, if only to yourself, that the identity you've built could be interrupted. That admission feels like weakness, so people avoid it, and the avoidance itself becomes the real danger. Not the layoff, but the years spent refusing to prepare for something entirely possible, simply because preparing for it felt like betting against yourself. I'd argue the opposite is true. Building a second skill, a second stream, a second option, isn't betting against yourself. It's the most confident thing a person can do, because it says, I am more than one job title, one employer's opinion of me. That's not fear talking. That's someone who understands their own worth well enough to make sure no single company gets to define it entirely. If you've stayed with me this far into this video, I want to say something to you directly, because it matters to me more than the algorithm ever will. You didn't have to keep listening. There are 1,000 shorter videos, 1,000 easier distractions, 1,000 places you could have gone instead. The fact that you're still here tells me something about you. That you take your future seriously enough to sit through an hour of honest, sometimes uncomfortable truth, instead of another 5 minutes of noise. I want to invite you to subscribe to this channel and come back every day, because the conversations we have here aren't built to entertain you for a moment. They're built to actually change how the next 20 years of your life go. And here's something I want to say to you specifically, because I suspect it's true for more of you than you'd admit out loud in a comment section. You are not behind because you're careless. You are not behind, if you're behind at all, because you didn't work hard enough. Most of the people watching this video worked incredibly hard for the life they have right now. The gap, if there is one, isn't a character flaw. It's the simple result of nobody sitting you down at 25 and explaining clearly, without judgment, exactly what your 40s would demand of you. Nobody warned you about the lifestyle creep. Nobody warned you about the countdown. Nobody warned you about the sandwich squeeze, the confidence trap, or the fragility hiding inside a job that felt permanent. You did the best you could with the information you had. That's not an excuse. That's just the truth. And truth is a better foundation to build from than shame ever will be. So let's go back to the content, because there's still real ground to cover. And I don't want to leave you with fear and no direction. Everything we've talked about so far, the lifestyle creep, the countdown, the sandwich squeeze, the confidence trap, the career cliff, they're not 5 separate problems. They're 5 faces of the same underlying truth. 40 is the age where the consequences of your 20s and 30s arrive all at once, disguised as ordinary life. The good news, and I mean this sincerely, is that consequences aren't verdicts. They're information. And information, once you actually look at it, can be acted on. Here's what acting on it actually looks like, in practical terms, without any of the vague coaching language that usually fills videos like this. It starts with a single afternoon. Not a lifestyle overhaul, not a dramatic reinvention, just one honest afternoon where you sit down and look at 3 numbers. What you actually earn, after taxes, every month. what you actually spend every month without rounding down the uncomfortable categories. And what's left over, the number that either grows your future or quietly disappears into a lifestyle that has no ceiling. Most people who feel financially lost at 40 have never actually looked at those three numbers side by side in the same sitting without flinching. It's not that they don't know how. It's that looking feels like it might confirm something they're afraid of. But here's the truth. Almost nobody tells you. The fear of looking is always worse than what you actually find. I have never once seen someone sit down, do that honest audit, and come away worse off for having done it. Clarity, even uncomfortable clarity, is always more useful than a comfortable fog. Once you have those three numbers, the next step isn't complicated, even though it isn't easy. You protect the third number, the leftover, the way you'd protect anything valuable enough to build a future on. You automate it before you can spend it. You treat contributions to your future the same way you treat your mortgage payment. Not optional, not negotiable, not something that only happens if there's anything left at the end of the month. Because if you wait for leftovers in a life engineered by marketing and convenience to consume every leftover it can find, there will never be any leftovers left. This is also the moment to revisit the countdown we talked about earlier, but with a slightly different lens. It's not just about starting to invest. It's about protecting the time you have left from the two forces most likely to steal it. The sandwich squeeze pulling at you from both directions, and the confidence trap convincing you that stability means you can stop paying attention. Both of those forces are quiet. Neither announces itself with a warning label. Which means the only real defense is a habit, not a single decision. A recurring, unglamorous check-in with your own numbers on a schedule, whether or not anything feels urgent that particular month. And the career piece we covered, the fragile single-income foundation most people are standing on, deserves one more sentence here before we move toward closing this out. Protecting your ability to earn isn't a side project you get to someday. It's part of the same afternoon of honest numbers, because your income is the asset that funds every other asset you're trying to protect. A retirement account means very little if the income funding it can vanish without a backup plan standing behind it, quietly waiting in the wings whether you ever need it or not. There's a version of you that existed at 25, standing in a life that hadn't happened yet, with no idea what 40 would actually feel like. That version of you couldn't have known about the lifestyle creep that eats a raise before it becomes wealth. Couldn't have known about the countdown quietly running in the background of every year that passed without a plan. Couldn't have known about the squeeze that comes from loving people on both sides of you at once, or the strange danger hiding inside feeling stable, or the fragility sitting underneath a job that felt, for so long, like solid ground. You know now. And knowing changes everything that happens next, even if it doesn't change what already happened, and it never will. I've thought a lot about why this particular age hits people the way it does, and I keep coming back to the same idea. It's not that 40 is harder than 30, or 50 harder than 40. It's that 40 is the first age where results start arriving. Not the effort, not the intentions, but the actual results of a decade or two of decisions made quietly, one at a time, without much scrutiny. 25 is planting. 35 is tending. 40 is the first real harvest. And harvests don't care how busy you were, or how good your reasons were for not looking closer. They only show you what actually grew. Some of what grew for you is good. I want to say that clearly because this hour has spent a lot of time in the uncomfortable corners of a financial life. And I don't want you walking away thinking the whole picture is bleak. You built something. You're still here, still working, still capable of change, still young enough. And 40, however it feels some mornings, is young. To redirect everything ahead of you. The people who turn this age around aren't the ones who never made mistakes. They're the ones who stopped at some point long enough to actually look, and then kept walking with their eyes open instead of closed. That's really all any of this comes down to. Not perfection. Not some dramatic overhaul that flips your whole life upside down in a single weekend. Just looking, honestly, at the handful of things we talked about today and choosing, quietly, to stop looking away from them. Nobody's gonna knock on your door and force this. There's no deadline printed anywhere except the one your own life is already running toward, at its own pace, whether you're paying attention or not. I want to leave you with something simple, because simple is what survives the drive home, the walk to bed, the morning after a video like this fades into the background of a busy week. 40 isn't a wall. It's a hallway. It's the part of the story where the character finally sees the shape of the whole building instead of just the room they're standing in. Some hallways are longer than others. Some are darker. But every one of them leads somewhere. And where they lead depends far less on how you started, and far more on what you do the moment you turn the light on. You are not the 25-year-old who didn't know. You're the 40-year-old who does. That's not a small difference. That's the entire difference. Somewhere tonight, or tomorrow morning, there's a spreadsheet you haven't opened, a number you haven't looked at, a conversation with a parent or a partner or a kid you've been putting off because it felt too heavy to start. I won't tell you exactly what to do with that. You know your life better than I ever could. But I'll tell you this. The version of you at 50 is already being written. Right now, quietly, in ordinary moments like this one, by whether the version of you at 40 looks or looks away. If this hour meant something to you, do 3 things for me. Subscribe to this channel so we can keep having these conversations honestly, without the noise most of the internet is built on. Share this with 5 people standing somewhere in this same hallway. A sibling, a coworker, a friend who talks about retirement like it's a joke because the alternative is too uncomfortable to sit with. And leave a comment, a real one, not a compliment. Tell me where you actually are right now, and tell me what you want the next video to help you with. I read them. All of them. And they shape what we build here next. The clock hasn't stopped since the day you were born. But for the first time in a long time, you're finally looking at it. Really looking. Without flinching. That's where it starts.